No individual, no group should be targeted simply because they are a political opponent or because the President of the United States has some personal animosity toward them. You've just said that President Trump is the most transparent president in history. Tragically and chillingly, you may be right when it comes to criminal justice, because far from ending weaponization of justice, I would submit, Madam Attorney General, that President Trump has embodied it. And we have a record. It is a public record of his express instructions that certain individuals be investigated. The Attorney General of New York, Tish James, my colleague, Adam Schiff, the former CISA director, Chris Krebs, the DHS former Chief of Staff, Miles Taylor. There's a list. And he has been transparent. In fact, 5 days before the indictment of James Comey, he put this post up as instructions to you. He didn't mince words. He was very open and public that you should indict James Comey and others because they are guilty as hell. No more delay now. 5 days before you indicted, or grand jury at your instructions indicted James Comey. I'd like to know from you what conversations you've had with President Trump about the indictment of James Comey.
Senator, I am not going to discuss any conversations I have or have not had with the President of the United States. You're an attorney, you have a law degree, and you know that I'm not going to do that. I also find it fascinating, because I'll keep fighting to ensure that law enforcement and the judicial process move forward without political interference. No one is above the law, not even the president. That's a quote from you, Senator Blumenthal, in 2017.
Well, let me ask you then, when you saw that
No
post,
one is above the law. That was your quote.
When you saw that post, did you talk to anybody in the White House?
I am not going to discuss any conversations I have, nor any investigations,
so
nor
you are unwilling to tell this committee
cases
about conversations with the White House.
And if I may
James
continue,
Comey's indictment.
And if I may
Let me
continue,
show you a picture.
James Comey was indicted by one of the most liberal grand juries in the United States.
The night before James Comey's indictment, you had dinner with the President of the United States. Pretty intimate group.
Actually, there were a lot of people there that night. That's a great picture.
Was James Comey discussed at that dinner?
I love that picture. That's a great picture. And there were a lot of people there that night. I think the entire cabinet was there.
Did you discuss James Comey with the President of the United States? He was sitting just to your left.
Well, 2 seats down, yes. 2 seats down. And I am not going to discuss any conversations I've had or not have with the President of the United States.
Because the American public is entitled to know, Madam Attorney General.
The entire cabinet was at that dinner.
Whether you took instructions from President Trump after he told you very directly to indict James Comey, which is weaponization of the Department of Justice. I want to agree with my colleague, Senator Hawley, that weaponization of our justice system must end. That's the reason that I proposed legislation, and I challenge him and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to join me in legislation that would create a statutory right of action for people who are selectively or maliciously prosecuted for political reasons. It would codify your manual, the Department of Justice manual, on political prohibitions against political considerations in charging decisions, and prohibit the White House from intervening, President Trump and any other president from intervening in charging decisions. It would make reforms to the grand jury process. You've just said this grand jury was liberal. We should reform the grand jury process to ensure that the government is not abusing its power and authority, and it will require transparency and accountability reforms at DOJ so that you will and other attorneys general be held accountable for these kinds of decisions. Will you join me in supporting that kind of reform?
Senator Blumenthal, I find it so interesting that you didn't bring any of this up during President Biden's administration when he was doing everything to protect Hunter Biden, his son. And I think you just saw what Director Radcliffe just released.
You know, this is an effort to be positive.
If I can finish answering the question, I'm not going to yell over you. I'm not going to get in the gutter with you. But information that the Biden administration told them not to investigate Hunter Biden's involvement with Ukraine.
What happens when the nation's chief law enforcement office bends toward politics instead of the law? Blumenthal kept returning to one simple, urgent question. Did President Trump pressure the Department of Justice to bring prosecutions for political reasons? And if so, what did Bondi say or do about it? The Justice Department exists to follow evidence and the law, not political wishes. Grand juries, indictments, and prosecutorial charging decisions are supposed to be made based on facts and legal standards by career prosecutors shielded from partisan direction. When a president publicly posts that a named individual should be indicted, and the Attorney General refuses to explain whether they discussed it, that creates both an appearance and potentially a reality of political influence over criminal prosecutions. Blumenthal reminded the committee of a troubling sequence. Public posts calling for prosecutions, a very public dinner shortly before a grand jury indictment, and personnel moves affecting prosecutors involved in sensitive cases. Even if every decision was technically lawful, the pattern erodes public confidence. Justice isn't only about what's legal, it's about what appears legitimate. You cannot have a system where prosecutions look like political favors and still claim the justice system is impartial. Bondi's repeated refusal to answer, "I'm not going to discuss any conversations I have or have not had with the president," leaves room for two interpretations. Either there are genuine confidentiality issues, and her silence preserves prosecutorial independence, or silence functions as a shield when explaining the truth would implicate political interference. When the stakes include the credibility of criminal justice itself, the default should be more transparency, not less. The emotional flare when Bondi attacked Blumenthal's military service reveals a common tactic. When substance becomes uncomfortable, personalize the argument and attack the questioner's credibility. It's effective at ending inquiry in the moment, but does nothing to address the substantive questions the public needs answered. The practical consequences are immediate. When prosecutors fear political pressure or seek colleagues removed for handling sensitive investigations, morale drops, experts leave, and institutional knowledge erodes. Cases requiring long-term work, corruption, human trafficking, transnational crime, suffer because skilled prosecutors are discouraged from holding powerful actors to account. This